On my son's 10th birthday, I couldn't find my husband to cut the cake with me. When I opened the door to our master bedroom, the man who had been laughing and sitting at the dinner table just half an hour ago was now upstairs, kissing his ex-wife. I didn't scream or cry. I simply turned around in silence and began packing his things. The next day he begged for my forgiveness, crying uncontrollably. But my son looked at me and said, "Mom, all I need is you." In that moment I realized that some families are built by leaving behind toxic people. I don't know what other mothers are doing the night before their child's birthday. But that night I stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of raspberry jam, my wrist aching with the strain. When I took the cake layers out of the fridge I slipped and nearly fell. It wasn't until that moment I realized I had been in this kitchen for 5 hours. Mark still wasn't home. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:13 p.m. We had agreed that after work he would help me set up the living room and double-check the menu for tomorrow. He had agreed so quickly, but this wasn't the first time he'd broken his word. Daniel's 10th birthday. I didn't want to treat it carelessly. This child is smart, sensitive, and always aware of my changing moods. Even when I just furrow my brow, he notices. He deserves a happy birthday, one filled with laughter, friends, and cake. Not a scene where his mother is left to struggle alone into the night, while his father is nowhere to be found. The phone rang. It was Penny, my mother-in-law. I took a deep breath before pressing the answer button. "Hello. Mariana, I just spoke to Mark. He said Monica will be coming tomorrow too." Her usual forceful tone immediately gave me a headache. "Monica." I tried to sound calm. "Yeah, after all, they were once a family and she knows Daniel, right? The more people, the merrier, don't you think?" She paused as if to make the point sting more. "I know you might have some personal feelings about it, but you can't let private grudges ruin the mood." I clenched my teeth. Personal grudges? This was my son's birthday party, not a gathering of old friends. Monica wasn't my family. She was Mark's ex-wife, the ideal woman I had been compared to for the last 10 years. Wealthy, elegant, beautiful, climbing the corporate ladder at a financial firm. And then there was me, just a ballet teacher carrying my injuries and weary knees, desperately teaching kids who lacked discipline to rise onto their toes. I held back all the words I wanted to say and responded softly, "I'll set an extra place setting." "Great, you're always so understanding." Her voice held a hint of satisfaction. After the call ended, I stared blankly at the yellowed kitchen light for a few seconds. Why was it always me who had to compromise? Why was I the one who always bent, always empathized, always considered others? What about my feelings? What about my dignity? When did I become a character in this happy family script? Around 11, the door finally opened with the sound of keys turning, and Mark walked in looking worn out. He was holding a takeout bag like a casual gesture of courtesy on his way home. "Still busy?" He smiled at me, his eyes glancing over the kitchen, quickly scanning the half-decorated cake. "I thought you said you'd come back to help me." I didn't look at him. "A client came up last minute. I didn't mean to." He set the takeout on the table and to my surprise sat down to eat it himself. "And Penny said Monica's coming tomorrow. You won't mind, will you?" I turned to face him and this time I actually smiled, but my smile wasn't warm. "I don't mind at all," I said. "I've never minded, Monica. It's you." I tossed the icing bag into the sink and walked back to the bedroom. I'm not the kind of woman who jumps to conclusions or fails to see the bigger picture. Even though Mark had been more and more dismissive these last couple of years, getting used to just mumbling, "uh-huh," or "yeah," I told myself. He was tired, going through his midlife crisis, a phase that every marriage experiences. But now I understood. The excuses I had made for him didn't hold water anymore. I used to be the most confident light on stage, dancing with grace and power. How did I become this? The night before my son's birthday, I was alone, slicing fruit, setting up balloons, icing a cake, while enduring the presence of another woman at my family's party. When I heard Mark open the takeout container in the kitchen, I could smell the chicken fried rice drifting down the hall. But instead of hunger, all I felt was how it highlighted my life. Cheap, unnoticed, and undervalued. The morning of the party, I woke up at 5:30. It wasn't the alarm that woke me, but that natural, nerve-wracked jolt of waking up. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally running through the day's schedule. 10 a.m. set up the venue, 11 a.m. cake arrives, 11:30 friends start showing up, 12 o'clock cut the cake. Everything was planned except for one thing: a stable family atmosphere. I glanced at the bed beside me. Mark hadn't come to bed at all. This wasn't the first time, but it still made me feel sick. I told myself not to let his irresponsibility ruin today. Today was Daniel's day and he deserved a perfect birthday. So I went downstairs, washed up, and started making the final preparations, packing all my anger and sadness into the air pump for the balloons. Guests began to arrive: Daniel's classmates, some parents I'd met through teaching dance, and my best friend Vivian brought a birthday gift. A beautiful set of binoculars which Daniel immediately fell in love with. Then Monica arrived. She wore a fitted navy blue dress with makeup clearly done with care, and her hair was impeccably styled. When she walked through the front door, it was like she was entering some kind of charity gala, not a child's backyard party. "Hi, Mariana," she flashed a perfect social smile at me, holding a beautifully wrapped gift bag. "I brought Daniel's favorite board game set." I forced a polite smile. "Thank you." I looked behind her. Of course Mark was there too, walking in right behind her. The distance between them wasn't too close, but just close enough to make you wonder if they'd come together. "Hey babe," Mark nodded at me as if nothing had happened. "Looks great. You've really worked hard." I didn't respond, just nodded. By noon the party was in full swing. The kids were playing with water guns in the backyard, balloons flying everywhere, the speakers playing Daniel's pre-selected playlist, and the birthday atmosphere was thick. I brought the cake to the dining table and called for him. "Daniel, come cut the cake." The kids gathered around and Daniel grinned, calling out, "Where's Dad? He's supposed to cut it with me." I smiled and patted his head. "I'll go find him." I made my way upstairs, my steps becoming heavier with each one. A vague sense of unease settled in my chest. Mark had said he was just going upstairs to change his shirt. But I already felt it. That woman's intuition, like the smell of smoke in the air. You don't see the fire, but you know something's wrong. The door to the master bedroom was ajar. As I pushed the door open, there was hardly any dramatic noise. No screams, no things falling to the floor. Only Monica leaning against the vanity, Mark standing in front of her, their distance close enough that you could hear their breathing. Monica's hand was still resting on Mark's chest, his shirt buttons undone, a faint trace of lipstick on his chin. I didn't look any further. I quietly closed the door behind me and turned back downstairs. No sounds, no collisions, no exposure. Like nothing had happened. The cake was still on the table and the kids were urging Daniel to make a wish. I set the cake down on the table and patted Daniel's shoulder. "All right, let's blow out the candles." Daniel looked around. "Where's Dad?" "He hasn't come yet." I shook my head and smiled. "He's probably busy, let's just continue for now." The kids giggled and gathered around. Daniel made his wish, blew out the candles, and I picked up the knife, cutting the cake slice by slice, like I was dividing the last 10 years of my life. Finally Mark came downstairs. He shoved his phone into his pocket and walked over to me, his usual smile plastered on his face. "You guys started without me? Not waiting for me? That's really disrespectful." I looked up at him, noticing the faint trace of lipstick still visible below his collar. I smiled faintly, reached up and straightened his shirt hem. "You're right. After the party, I'll give you the most respectful arrangement. I'll personally pack your bags for you." He froze, his smile faltering. The kids continued eating cake, laughing and playing, completely unaware that the storm had quietly started. Mark opened his mouth, whispering, "Mariana, it's not what you think." I didn't respond. I simply turned and walked away. Mark's suitcase was sprawled open in the foyer, just like his usual unpreparedness to face the consequences. I grabbed his shirts, stuffing them into the bag one by one, carelessly rolling his tie and tossing it into the corner. I didn't even glance at his 10-year-old razor. When I saw the cologne he thought was so charming, it hit me like a sharp, nauseating scent. I twisted the cap tight, wrapped it in a plastic bag and tossed it in the bottom of the suitcase like I was dealing with some toxic waste. The kitchen still bore the remnants of the party. The cake dish was empty, streamers still hung from the chandelier, and the floor was littered with flattened balloons. Mark stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing his temple as he said, "What's all this about? Just because I didn't come down right away for the cake cutting? You're being too sensitive, Mariana." I looked up at him, my voice as calm as if I were reporting the weather. "I saw you, Mark. In the bedroom." His face froze for a second, then a sarcastic smile curved his lips. You misunderstood. We were just talking. Monica was upset and I was comforting her. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Your lipstick on your shirt was comforting her? Your undone shirt buttons were releasing some emotion? His face darkened. Then he began to justify himself, as I had expected. Have you ever thought about why I'd want to talk to her? Do you realize you haven't cared about me at all these past 2 years? You're always focused on Daniel, on work, on the dance school, on scheduling, on picking him up from school. It's like I don't have a place in this house anymore. He raised his voice, almost as if searching for an excuse for himself, or maybe to justify what he was about to lose. I looked at him and all I felt was emptiness. So you're saying that all the years I've sacrificed my career, stayed up in the middle of the night to care for a sick child and handled everything on my own, that I've been too cold to you, and that you needed another woman to compensate for that? He frowned as if the sharpness in my words stung him. You don't understand a man's needs, he muttered. I couldn't help but laugh. A laugh of pure exhaustion, the kind that comes from finally seeing the truth. Right, I don't understand. Because a real man wouldn't confuse his own weakness, desires, and lack of responsibility, and then blame his wife for being too motherly after he betrays her. He went silent. Half a minute passed with no words. Daniel's bedroom door creaked open and small footsteps came from upstairs. I didn't want him to see this. I grabbed the keys and the garage remote, took a deep breath. I don't want to waste another word with you today. If you insist on staying, fine. I'll take Daniel to Vivian's to stay for a while. You want to keep playing the victim? Wait for Penny to come and defend you. He moved to step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. Don't touch me and don't play games with Daniel. Daniel stood at the top of the stairs in his rocket-patterned pajamas, clutching his little blanket. His eyes were a little sleepy, a little unsure. Mom? Where are we going? I walked up to him, took his hand. Sweetheart, we're going to Aunt Vivian's house to stay for a few nights. She has your favorite cartoons ready to watch with you. He nodded and didn't ask any more questions, just squeezed my hand tighter. As we left, Mark stood silently in the center of the living room, not a word from him. Maybe he didn't know what to say, or maybe he thought this was just some drama that I'd eventually get over, just like before. But this time I was really tired. As I drove out of the neighborhood, my phone rang. It was Penny. What are you doing? Her voice was full of reprimand. Mark says you're leaving? Are you crazy? Have you thought about Daniel's feelings? I laughed and put the call on speaker. When your son was cozying up to another woman, did he think about Daniel's feelings? She was silent for a few seconds before sneering. Men, they make mistakes sometimes. Is it really that hard for you to understand? Marriage is never without its bumps. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Penny, you're right, marriage does have its bumps. But it's not about one person betraying with impunity, while the other acts like nothing's wrong and stays in the house. She started to say something else, but I hung up the phone. The car fell into silence. I glanced down at Daniel in the passenger seat. He was holding his blanket, quietly staring out the window at the passing streetlights. He didn't say a word, but I knew he had heard everything. That night I didn't sleep. Daniel fell asleep quickly in Vivian's guest room, while I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, asking myself one question. How much longer could I keep tolerating this? Vivian left the door open for us. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit with the familiar scent of her signature lemon verbena candles. A clean, bright, and warm fragrance that gave a false sense of security. She took the suitcase from my hand, her voice soft as she asked, "Would you like some red wine or warm milk?" "I've got both ready." I shook my head. "Milk, please. It helps Daniel sleep better." She nodded and didn't press further, heading to the kitchen to heat the milk. Once Daniel finished his milk and snuggled into the guest room to sleep, I sat on her old sofa in the living room, finally feeling my body relax. But my mind didn't follow suit. Vivian sat across from me, cradling her hot cup of tea. "You look like a commander who just finished a battle," she said lightly, though I could tell she was worried. I looked down and smiled a little. "Maybe. It's just that this battle feels like it's been going on for 10 years. Tonight's the first time I've turned the first page of the map." She waited quietly for me to continue. "I didn't not consider that he might cheat. I just didn't expect it would happen on Daniel's birthday in our bedroom with his ex-wife. Then he comes downstairs and accuses me of not respecting him. I could hear the tremor in my own voice as I spoke. Vivian shook her head and sighed. Men, when they're caught, they always like to blame the woman for not being sweet enough. I gave a bitter laugh. You're right. I've even started to wonder if maybe I've been too cold, too busy, too exhausted, and that's why he found an excuse. Mariana, she interrupted me, her tone serious, you're not cold. You've been trying too hard to keep this family together. You've emptied yourself and they turn around and say you're not soft enough. I didn't answer, only stared at the steam rising from my teacup. You don't owe them understanding, she continued. It's them who need to repent, not you. In that moment my nose tingled with the start of tears. We sat there in silence with only the occasional sound of a car passing by outside. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on Vivian's living room couch all night long. The sea breeze blew through the window frame and the clock on the wall ticked away, yet I felt like I had been forgotten by time. I sat still, neither tired nor moving. Penny's words kept echoing in my mind. Men make mistakes sometimes. It's normal. It felt like a barb repeatedly stabbing into every place I had ever compromised. At 6 a.m, Daniel woke up before I had even closed my eyes. He was wearing his rocket-patterned pajamas, his hair a bit messy, his little face wrinkled. He tiptoed downstairs and upon seeing me sitting there, stopped in his tracks. Mom. His voice was soft. Why aren't you asleep? I smiled at him. There's just too much on my mind, I can't quiet it down. He sat beside me quietly asking, Are you still mad at Dad? My heart tightened as I looked at him. At only 10 years old, Daniel was always careful to watch the adult's emotions, as if he never allowed himself to act on a whim. I tried to soften my tone. I'm not mad. I'm just thinking, if your dad and I lived apart, would you be okay with that? He lowered his head, hugging his knees, and was silent for a few seconds before softly saying, Actually, I don't really want to live with him. I didn't expect those words from Daniel. I froze for a moment. Why do you say that? I asked. He turned his face toward me, his eyes clear, and it broke my heart. He always says I disturb him. Sometimes, when I just want to play with him for a little while, he says he's working and tells me not to bother him. He also said, if it weren't for me, you two might still be like you were before. I felt my breath catch for a moment. You remember that? I asked, my throat tight. He nodded. I was 6 then, but I've never forgotten. When he yelled that at you, I was behind the kitchen door. I pulled him into my arms, unable to stop the tears from falling. It wasn't because I was sad, but because I felt relief. Relief that I didn't have to keep pretending to preserve the wholeness of this family. You're the best choice I've ever made, Daniel. Do you know that? He nodded and hugged me. At that moment I made up my mind. In the afternoon I called Mark. I've hired a lawyer and they'll reach out to you. My voice was calm, almost unrecognizable. He was silent at first, then quietly asked, So, we're really going to go this far? You pushed us here, Mark. I'm just finally willing to admit that I should have let go and left long ago. He sighed and changed the subject. How about you take Daniel home first? I'll move out for a while and give you some space to calm down. I laughed softly. No need to calm down, Mark. I'm calmer than I thought. We just need a clear ending. He started to say something else, but I hung up the phone. In the afternoon, Daniel and I packed to go home. Daniel didn't ask much, only said, Going back doesn't mean we're going back to how things were, right, Mom? I nodded. No, we're going back to throw away what needs to be thrown away. I took Daniel back home and the evening sun was especially beautiful. Too beautiful, which felt almost ironic. The swing in the yard was still swaying as if nothing had changed. But I knew everything had already changed. Mark and his luggage were gone. He left a note on the kitchen island, written like a memo from a boss to a subordinate. I'm going to move out temporarily to give you some space and allow us both to think about what we really want. I've left Daniel's clothes on the living room sofa. Remember to wash them soon. I'll visit him every week, of course if you allow it. Mark. I read the note, then immediately tore it up. Along with that self-righteous tone, I threw it all into the trash. Daniel dropped his backpack and started looking around. It seems more comfortable without him here. I didn't respond, just brushed the dust off the living room rug for him. The days that followed were surprisingly peaceful. Mark texted every day. In the morning it was, Good morning, how are you guys today? At noon, what's Daniel having for lunch? And in the evening, do you need me to pick him up from school? pretending to play the good father, the good husband, a role he'd never bothered to play before. I didn't reply. And he never actually showed up. Penny called once, trying to remind me gently, no matter how angry you are, you can't keep using the kids as pawns. Daniel needs his father. I told her directly, what Daniel needs is a stable, safe, and unselfish adult to look up to, not someone who makes excuses every time something goes wrong. She sighed heavily, calling me difficult to communicate with. I didn't answer her calls after that. I reworked my schedule, clearing my afternoons after 3 p.m. to focus on picking Daniel up from school. A few times he'd skip toward me, his little backpack bouncing, waving at me, "Mom, you're here early today. My friends say you drive really cool." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "You tell your friends I'm not just cool, I'm your most loyal driver and bodyguard." He giggled and tugged me toward the car. "Let's go, bodyguard, we're getting ice cream." At night, when it was just the two of us at home, it was quiet, like a reward. I no longer got interrupted at dinner, no longer worried about who wouldn't come home at night, no longer needed to listen to a man say with a dismissive tone, "This meal's not bad." We started to find our rhythm. Daniel set the table, always putting the spoons the wrong way around and laughing while waiting for me to correct him. I'd play his favorite album while he took a bath, like setting up a hotel experience. One night, I even opened a bottle of red wine for the first time in ages and sat on the balcony, watching him do somersaults in the backyard while writing his weekly journal. That was when I realized. The sense of family completeness was never about the number of people, but whether our hearts were truly together. One day, while picking Daniel up from school, he suddenly asked, "Mom, will you and Dad get back together?" I froze for a second. "Why do you ask that all of a sudden?" He looked out the window, his voice soft but serious. "Because I think you're happier now." I paused, my hand tightening on the steering wheel. "You didn't smile much before," he continued. "You were always busy, sighing, calling Dad, or looking at the clock waiting for him to come back." I stared at the countdown for the red light, hearing his next words almost make my eyes burn with tears. "Now, you're a little like the mom I remember when I was younger. The one who smiled like she was really happy." I took a deep breath, gently running my hand through his hair. "Thank you for telling me that, Daniel. Do you think if it's just the two of us you'd be sad?" He shook his head. "I know you and Dad have problems, no need to explain. Sometimes I feel like he doesn't really like me." I froze. "Why do you think he doesn't like you?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at the seat back in front of him, quietly saying, "A few times I heard him on the phone saying that if it weren't for me, you two might still be happy together." My heart lurched like I had been hit with something blunt. I forced myself to keep the car steady as I drove into the driveway. That night I stood outside his door for a long time, listening to his steady breathing, slowly easing the weight on my heart. I realized that what truly made it impossible for me to turn back wasn't Mark's infidelity, not Penny's cold sarcasm, nor the years of neglect and indifference. It was my child, who, in his short 10 years of life, had already gotten used to not being welcomed, who had learned to recognize who truly loved him. I couldn't let him carry that doubt anymore. And I couldn't let him think that in love, betrayal could be tolerated, and in a family, indifference could be accepted. I had to be his example. Starting now. I never thought I'd willingly meet Monica one-on-one again. She was part of Mark's past, and for a long time the embodiment of my pain. But when she sent that short message, I didn't hesitate. "We should talk. Not about Mark. About us." I replied with one word. "Okay." We met at the cafe in the town center, by the window where you could see the old bookstore across the street and the fountain in the square. She was already there when I arrived, wearing a slate gray trench coat. Her hair was looser than it had been at Daniel's birthday party, and something about her seemed softer, less guarded. When I sat down, she handed me a cup of hot tea. "I remember you don't like coffee. You've got a good memory." I took a sip, didn't bother to say thank you. She didn't dance around anything. "You saw us upstairs that day, didn't you?" I looked at her but didn't respond. She gave a bitter smile. "You didn't say anything. Maybe because you were too calm. Or maybe because you already knew it wasn't worth the fight." "You're not denying it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Of course not. Honestly, I wasn't even trying that hard to fake anything that day. Mark kept dropping hints about how miserable he was, how you'd changed, how you didn't understand him anymore. I wanted to see for myself. And I did. You were clearer than I expected." and far more dignified than I imagined. I stared at her eyes for a few seconds. So what are you really trying to say? She leaned back in her chair, meeting my gaze with unsettling calm. I just wanted you to know, you're not the only one he lied to. You're not the only woman who ever believed in him. I paused, my voice flat as if we were talking about someone I didn't know. Why did you two get divorced? She didn't answer right away. Took a sip of her coffee first, then said slowly, You think I cheated first, right? That's what he told you. I said nothing. She continued, Yes, we were both unfaithful. But he cheated first. I was the one who asked for the divorce, because I figured something out before he did. Mark doesn't really love anyone. He only loves the version of himself that's adored. I furrowed my brow. I used to think he was nostalgic, that he just couldn't let go. But that's not it. He needs someone orbiting around him, telling him he's wonderful. The moment you stop doing that, he starts looking for a new audience. She paused, carefully choosing her next words. He cheated during your first year of marriage, you know. With a client from work. You were still teaching ballet 6 days a week then, weren't you? My fingers clenched around the teacup, the handle giving a soft click under the pressure. I'm not here to reopen wounds, Mariana, she said gently. I'm here to tell you, it wasn't your fault. Not because you worked too hard or were too tired or too distracted. This is his flaw. He lacks loyalty at his core. And he doesn't intend to fix it. I stared out the window at the fountain. A gust of wind lifted a few loose pages off a nearby bench, sending them spinning through the air. She added softly, Remember how fast he married you? Our divorce papers weren't even final and he was already spending weekends at your place. He didn't move on. He just rushed to find the next stage. I took a deep breath. I really thought I'd won, I said quietly. So did I. Monica shrugged. You know, I never told him this, but the reason I didn't have a child with him, it wasn't because I didn't want kids. It was because I knew he'd never be a real father. I didn't want my child to grow up wondering if they were the reason everything went wrong. That hit me like a nail straight into my chest. And for the first time I said something I had never told another soul. Daniel thinks his dad doesn't like him. He overheard Mark once saying, if it weren't for the kid, life would be easier. Monica closed her eyes as if the words physically hit her. Mariana, she said softly, he wasn't bad to you. He's just not good to anyone. Leaving him, you're not just saving yourself. You're showing Daniel what's worth holding on to and what needs to be left behind. I nodded and suddenly the weight in my chest lifted. This conversation wasn't a showdown. It wasn't a competition to see who'd lost more. It was one former cast member telling another where the backstage exit was. We didn't hug. We didn't even say goodbye. We simply stood and walked off in separate directions. But I knew in that moment, Mark was no longer the man from my past. He was just a dated story. And I was finally, truly walking forward. It was a gray Wednesday afternoon when Penny showed up unannounced. I had just finished teaching a class. Daniel had told me he'd walk home by himself that day, so I didn't head to school. I had just stepped into the kitchen to pour myself a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw her standing there, wearing a camel-colored coat with gold buttons, hair perfectly styled, holding a pastry box like she was visiting a newborn. I hesitated for a couple of seconds, then opened the door. I'm not here to argue, she said with a tight smile. I just wanted to check on you and Daniel. I didn't invite her in, but she stepped across the threshold anyway, already slipping off her coat as she said, I brought you that caramel walnut cake you used to love. From that bakery on the corner. You remember? I stared at the box in her hand, my voice as flat as ever. I don't like sweets, Penny. You know that. Her smile faltered for a beat, then quickly returned to the polished, maternal version of itself. Mariana, I'm not here to scold you, she said, settling into a chair, hands clasped. I just think everyone deserves another chance. I sipped my coffee, leaning against the kitchen counter, silent. Mark's been having a rough time, she began, slipping into her familiar rhythm. There are layoffs at work. The stress is high. You know how men are at that age. Sometimes they make mistakes. Like repeated affairs? I asked, my voice cold as the wind outside. She paused for a couple seconds. I'm not saying he was right. But you can't hold on to this forever. He's Daniel's father. He's your husband. It's not something you can just walk away from. I walked over and gently placed the coffee cup in front of her. So you're here to ask me to let it go? To go back to trusting a man who cheated on me, on my son's birthday? She opened her mouth to object, but I didn't give her the chance. Do you know the last time Mark helped Daniel with his homework? 2nd grade. Do you remember when Daniel had a 104-degree fever at age 6? Who sat in there all night holding him? Who couldn't be reached, didn't even call back? I stepped closer, locking eyes with her. Do you know he once told Daniel that if it weren't for him, maybe we would have been happier? Penny's face darkened, her gaze shifting, lips tightening. Kept going. And now you want me to keep my son in a household where he's never affirmed, never understood, never truly loved? You want me to go back. For what? A title? A fantasy of a complete family? Just then the sound of a key turning echoed from the front door. Daniel stepped in, backpack slung over one shoulder. He froze when he saw the scene in the living room. "Grandma?" he said, surprised, but then walked over and gently placed a hand on my arm. I glanced at him but said nothing. Penny looked at him and softened her voice. "Sweetheart, I just came to see how you and your mom are doing. We're still family, right?" Daniel paused, then said seriously, "But real family shouldn't hurt each other." Penny's expression collapsed. I leaned down and whispered, "Go put your backpack upstairs, sweetheart. Mommy will be right there." He nodded and trotted up the stairs. I turned back to face her, my voice low but firm as steel. "You never saw me as family. I was just the woman you all needed. The mother to raise your grandson, the wife to manage your son's mess, the one to plan your parties, cook your dinners and stay obedient." I smiled faintly. "Too bad. That woman, the wife, she's gone now." Penny stood, her fingers trembling slightly as if she still wanted to say something. I calmly opened the door and motioned for her to leave. She didn't rush out, but I didn't look at her again. When the door finally closed, the whole house fell quiet. Not silent. Peaceful. The kind of peace that finally felt like it belonged to me. The day of the formal negotiation dawned unusually bright. I wore a black suit, my hair pulled back, makeup crisp and understated. Not to impress anyone, just to reflect who I had become. A woman who no longer depended, no longer hesitated, no longer allowed herself to be diminished. My lawyer, Carol, was a former prosecutor 10 years older than me. Sharp eyes. Sharper tongue. Over the phone she had told me, "We're not going in to beg. We're going in to claim. You speak the truth, I'll handle the rest." Mark showed up 10 minutes late. Classic move. His way of avoiding what he didn't want to face. He looked disheveled. Hair unkempt, tie askew, his face forced into composure but betraying anxiety. His lawyer was a young man, more accustomed to real estate deals than dismantling marriages. We sat at opposite ends of the long table, rows of documents spread between us. The air had that dry, brittle silence, like the woods before a storm. Mark spoke first, using his usual soft-voiced, mature man tone, trying to set a conciliatory mood. "I think we've both had time to cool off. Maybe it's time to talk about a solution that works for both sides? You and Daniel come back home, I'll move out for a bit. We can start over, give each other some space." I looked up, met his eyes and spoke my first words of the day. "Mark, this isn't a fight. It's a divorce." His voice sharpened. "You're really this determined? Over a misunderstanding?" Carol opened her folder calmly. "A misunderstanding? You mean my client walking in on you intimately engaged with your ex-wife, or the ongoing private communication and suggestive messages attempting to rekindle that relationship?" Mark's face froze. "You had her snooping through my phone?" I let out a short laugh. "You think I'd bother with that? You didn't even bother deleting your backups. I just opened our shared cloud account." He opened his mouth but no rebuttal came. Carol continued, "Given the circumstances, we're requesting full residential rights and a majority share of the marital assets. The grounds are as follows. First, the breakdown of the marriage was caused by your misconduct. Second, my client has a steady income, a full parenting record, and has borne over 90% of the caregiving duties over the past 10 years. Mark tried to cut in, but Carol raised her hand slightly. "You're free to contest it, but we'll be submitting records of your lack of involvement in Daniel's education, missed school meetings and signed medical documents and a written statement from your child." Color flushed across his face. I stepped in then, voice quiet but clear. "You once told Daniel that if he hadn't been born, maybe we would have been happier. He heard you. He was 6. Mark's lips moved, but all he could muster was a mumbled, "You know I didn't mean it like that." I nodded. "But you said it." The whole meeting lasted less than an hour. Mark started out trying to steer the narrative. By the end, all he had left were darting eyes and silence. Just before we signed, he tried one last time. "So that's it? No part of you still feels anything? You're really just walking away from all of this?" I picked up the pen and signed cleanly at the bottom of the page. "I'm not walking away lightly. I've just realized this marriage isn't a house in need of repairs. It's a collapsed ruin that needs to come down." Carol slid over the second agreement for child custody. I signed that too, steady and sure. The final terms. I retained exclusive residency in our home. Full custody of Daniel with monthly child support from Mark. Assets divided in my favor. 60% of liquid assets. Ownership of all household furnishings and the vehicle. Mark relinquished rights to the home and agreed to a partial transfer of his retirement fund. When it was over, I stood, thanked Carol with a nod, and didn't say another word to Mark. As I walked out of the law office, sunlight hit my face, warm but not overwhelming. I took a long, deep breath. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of revenge, no victory dance. What I felt was quiet. A deep, anchoring quiet. The kind that only comes when you finally step off the stage of a play written for you and start writing your own. Mark's downfall came faster than I expected. Less than 2 weeks after the divorce papers were signed, I heard he'd run into trouble at work. Not a scandal, not a firing. Something worse, something more humiliating. People had simply stopped taking him seriously. He was demoted from a mid-level project manager to overseeing a failed commercial redevelopment no one wanted to touch. They called it a temporary reassignment, but even his office was moved to the far end of the hall next to the copy room. Vivian forwarded me a message from one of her friends in accounting at Mark's firm. Apparently no one paid him any mind in meetings anymore. Even HR joked that his aura had collapsed. I didn't laugh. Not because I felt sorry for him, but because something clicked. I hadn't just walked away from a broken man. I'd been propping up an empty shell. Monica, on the other hand, had cut him off completely. Mark tried showing up at her office. Security escorted him out. He sent her over a dozen texts. She blocked him. One day he even called Vivian's landline trying to check in through mutual friends. She shut it down cold. "She's doing great, better than you ever did." After that he went quiet. But of course Penny wasn't so easily silenced. She tried calling, then emailing, then, unbelievably, sent a handwritten letter on pink stationery sprayed with perfume. Not a single line of apology. Just pages of passive-aggressive appeals. For Daniel's sake. This was your family too. Mark still wants to be a good father. I took a photo of the letter and forwarded it to Carol. She promptly issued a formal legal notice, polite but firm. Any communication unrelated to visitation must go through legal channels. A few days later, Penny showed up at my door. I didn't answer. I just watched her from between the living room curtains, standing on my porch with a gift box wrapped in a faded red ribbon. She knocked more than a dozen times, then finally left the box and walked away. I didn't open it. I tossed it straight into the trash, ribbon and all. That night, I sat on the balcony watching Daniel in the backyard trying to master his cartwheels. He wasn't good at it. His landings were crooked, his arms wobbly. But he kept going. Falling, standing, laughing, trying again. And I realized, this child had something I'd never allowed myself to have. Freedom. I had stayed for him. I had endured for him. But now I had something else to do for him. To become someone he could look up to. Not as the woman who held it all together, but as the woman who walked away. The next day I walked into a local community theater rehearsal hall. The floor was scuffed, the sound system glitchy. But standing on that gray-blue stage, my heart felt like it had finally returned to the center of my chest. The director, a silver-haired woman named Tess, scanned my resume. "You haven't performed in over 10 years?" I nodded. "I've been teaching. And doing other things." She studied me for a moment, then asked, "Why now?" I answered without hesitation. "Because I'm not done. I'm not here to reminisce about the stage. I'm here to get back on it." She smiled slowly, then nodded. "Come in Thursday night. Cold reading." That night I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a printed rehearsal schedule and the first few scenes of the script. Daniel leaned against my shoulder eating cereal. "Mom," he asked, "what role are you playing?" I raised an eyebrow. "A woman whose life falls apart, and decides she's done waiting for someone else to cast her." He nodded thoughtfully, spoon in his mouth. "Sounds like you." I laughed. Then he asked, "Does she win in the end?" I thought for a moment. "She's still on her way. But she's not who she used to be." He hugged me for a second, then ran off to brush his teeth. I stayed at the table, flipping to the last page of the script. The final line read, "I'm done waiting for the spotlight. When I dance, I am the light." On Daniel's 11th birthday, the sun was bright, the air was soft, and even the neighbor's dog seemed unusually quiet. There was no big party, no balloons or streamers, no house full of unfamiliar parents. Just a few kids Daniel genuinely liked, plus Vivian and Tess, and a cake that was half the size of last year's, but somehow twice as delicious. When I asked him what he wanted for his birthday, he said, "Can we go to San Francisco again? To that theater where you said you had your first performance?" I smiled and said, "Sure, just give me a day to move some rehearsals around." He nodded, completely serious. "Deal." Our home now wasn't the one with Mark's name on the deed, but the one granted to me by the court. On the outside it looked nearly the same, but everything felt different. This house belonged to a version of me that no longer swallowed her voice, no longer yielded out of fear. And it belonged to a boy who now knew he was seen, valued, and safe. I continued working with the theater troupe. Rehearsals took up 2 nights a week. Tess once told me, "The first time you stepped on stage, I knew, you don't need to be taught. You just need to believe you still deserve it." Daniel was always in the audience, my most loyal supporter. One night I couldn't find my performance shoes backstage. Turns out he had taken them to polish them for me, using an old toothbrush to clean the seams. He said, "The light will hit them better this way." Sometimes I'd snap photos during rehearsal, occasionally post a few reflections on social media. Not for likes, just to remind myself that I was still growing, still branching out. That night, after the small birthday gathering had ended and everyone had gone home, Daniel and I cleaned up the kitchen together. He was licking the last bit of frosting from the cake bowl when he suddenly asked, "Mom, what kind of person do you think I'll grow up to be?" I set down the plate, sat across from him, and looked into those earnest, still soft eyes. "I hope you grow up to be someone who knows his worth. Someone who understands boundaries, who respects others and knows when to say no." He nodded, thinking it over. I added, "And I hope you remember this. The most important thing in life isn't making everyone else happy. It's not making yourself small just to fit someone else's comfort." He said quietly, "Like you." I smiled. "Like us. We both get to choose the kind of life we want." He nodded again, a little more sure this time, then went to the kitchen for a glass of milk. I watched him move around with quiet ease, and my heart settled into something calm. Not relief. Not the kind of breath you take when something is finally over. But the kind you take when you realize you're finally walking your own path. Later that night, I was reading a script by my bedside when a message popped up on my phone. It was from Tess. Just one line. "You're not playing her anymore. She's living in you now." I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone down beside my pillow. Right before I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, "Well done, Mariana."